We want to thank our sponsors that specifically sponsor research. And BP and Alaska Litho deserves, they're a really easy organization to work with. I want to also add that because not only do they contribute to us, but they actually bid on our work, and they give us money, and they win the bid to do the work. So that's a double whammy, and they're easy to work with. So First Bank, Alaska Communications, AEL&P, RBC Global Asset Management, First National Bank, Wasserman & Associates, Alaska Pacific Bank, and Bartlett Regional Hospital all contributed to this work. And of course, the City and Borough of Juneau provides base funding, core funding to our organization. So we want to thank them as well for their contributions to our research efforts. Just a couple of the big highlights that I want to cover about our economy. We're doing really well here in Juneau. We should be grateful. This past year, and from 2010 to 2011, we see that wages are up, employment is up, unemployment is down, gross business sales are up. In fact, they're at all-time high here in our community. Population in Juneau is at an all-time high as well. We see the government sector is steady. We're seeing increased employment in the private sector, which is we're a capital city, and government's always going to be important to us. But it's also great to see that the private sector is growing. Our main industries are doing stronger, and we are seeing school enrollment, which had been going down for many years. The past 5 years has sort of leveled off. And in terms of the region, also generally good news here in Southeast Alaska. While our report focuses primarily on Juneau, we do want to put it in the context of Southeast Alaska and the region that we live in. Total employment is up in the region, as are wages. Unemployment is down. And the population in Southeast Alaska, which has been, 1997 was our peak population in the region at 73,830 people. And in end of 2012, we ended at 73,500 people. So we're seeing that trend reversing, and hopefully we'll see the population in our region begin to grow again. As I think we all know, we had the timber industry suffered, is the primary explanation for this decline, and that those issues, while the timber industry isn't where it used to be, they're down to about 250 jobs. And so if that grows, we could even expect more growth in our region. So with that, I want to introduce to you Ava Bornstein. Ava is our lead researcher at the Juneau Economic Development Council. She's been with us since 2008, been in Juneau for the last 28 years. Before coming to JEDC, she taught business finance at the University of Alaska Southeast. Her background includes work in corporate strategic planning for a Fortune 500 company, as well as banking management. She has an undergraduate degree from Bryn Mawr. She has a master's degree from Yale in chemistry. But most important to us is that she has an MBA from Wharton Business School out of Pennsylvania. She recently served a 5-year term on the Juneau Commission on Sustainability. And despite all the really cool projects that we do, she's really proud of 2 projects that are really special, not big efforts on our part, big community projects, big community collaboration, but she's been instrumental in creating the Juneau's Farmer Market and the local food festival. I mean, without her input, I don't think that we would have got either of those projects off the ground. So thank you, Ava. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ava. She's going to go through the details of our presentation, and then I will help with answering the questions. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you all for coming. So I get to go through highlight some of the more details behind the numbers that Brian just showed you. And so I want to start with a picture of Juneau in terms of how we make our money in this town. And this slide shows you how this is the wages paid in Juneau. It's we picked this up from the state of Alaska, and it's given to the state of Alaska by employers. So this is all wages paid by employers in Juneau. And so you can see that for the most part, we're a government town. 50% of wages in Juneau come from either the state, the federal, or the local government. And The thing that's not captured in this slide is income from self-employment and income from investments and the other types of income that people have in addition to wages. But we do know from some statistics that the federal government presents that in Juneau in particular, wage income represents 67% of our economy. And in fact, according to the federal government, self-employed income in Juneau is about 4% of the economy, which is, and we have this statistic in the book, 4% is quite low for Southeast Alaska. It's among the lowest communities for self-employed income. In terms of the other two, there's investment income, which is about 16% of the income in our community, and transfer payments, which is payments like Social Security from the government. That's about 13%. So again, 67% are wages, and 50% of that is government wages here in town. Here's an overview of how the private and government sector, both in the number of jobs and in wages paid, has grown over the past 10 years. And the top one is the employment trend. That's the number of jobs. And you can see that the government, which is the lower line, is fairly flat. There's been little ups and downs, maybe a little down. But going back 10 years, we're just almost back to where we were, slightly up. While the private sector has actually grown over that time. We took a hit in 2009, but we've recovered quite well from that time. And wages, meanwhile, have continued to increase over that 10-year period without really any setback. So while we may have lost some jobs, we've earned more income steadily over that time. This is for the past year, the change in employment by industry. Here, the top gain in employment has been natural resources and mining, from which I think we can conclude that's the mining employment that's been growing in the past year. Second are professional and business services, while the biggest loss in jobs down at the bottom there is in the construction industry. One of the things that's not in here, again, is self-employed. And we do have a statistic that shows that fishing, which is mostly self-employed fishermen, and also crew, which is not reported in here, gained about 75 jobs, or 75 between fishermen and crew, increased by about 75. So that actually puts it at about third in our community for employment gain. We always worry about losing state employment, and here's what that has looked like over the past 10 years. We did have some declines, but then we've had some gains, and this year it was a net 4 loss. And if we looked at actual jobs transferred to Juneau, there were 15 more jobs transferred, net 15 more jobs transferred into Juneau in the past year. Here's a show of business licenses in Juneau. So this is our private industry sector, and the top number of business licenses at the bottom there, I think it's 403, is for real estate, sales, leasing, and rentals, which was a surprise to me that would be the highest number of business licenses would be in that area. And that's followed closely by professional and scientific, technical services, and trade, retail and wholesale trade. And that's where most of the businesses that you think of in Juneau would fall into. And between that and then I guess those 4 areas there account for exactly 50% of our businesses in town. Again, the self-employed is not in here for fishermen, and so we took a look at some other statistics that showed us that there were about 300 people in town who reported self-employed income as fishermen. So you can see where that falls. That's up there, right up there with our top businesses in town. Unemployment is looking very good in Juneau. We're quite below the state and the national, and it's been on a downward trend for the past 3 years. While our per capita personal income, now this is all income received by individuals. Again, this goes back to the wages, business income, transfer payments, and those 4 categories there added together, divided by the number of people in Juneau, and that's at an all-time high. In fact, it has just surpassed the previous high, which was 2 years ago. We took a dip last year, but recovered fully. Here's a breakdown of household income by percent of households, and we're comparing here Juneau to the U.S., and you could see that our households are in the upper income brackets, where, for example, in the lowest category there, in the lowest 2 categories, the United States has about 44% of citizens in that income bracket. We've got only about 25% in that income bracket, whereas on the higher end, we've got more high-income individuals in those income brackets than the nation as a whole. So, in fact, we're shifted into that higher income bracket here in Juneau. So, demographics, our population has been on an upswing since its low point there in 2000. Or since a recent low point in 2007, and then it's trended back up. In fact, we had a pretty good jump this past year. Of 3.2% from the previous year. And here's a look at southeast population if you take Juneau out of the picture. So the top line there is southeast excluding Juneau, and then the bottom line is Juneau alone. And you can see that both of those numbers are trending up. And we took out the Juneau because that's such a big number that it might have masked a trend that might be different in the rest of the region, but we can see here that the same trend has been seen in the region outside of Juneau, which is that upward trend in population of the past few years. And this is now showing you the percent change in population. And what you can see here is that this past year, that percent change has really, I should say that the more flat line that's running through there is Alaska now, and then Southeast and Juneau are the lines that are bouncing around a little more. But certainly our percent increase in the past year was much higher than Alaska as a whole. Here's a look at migration to Juneau, because we had a net positive migration to Juneau in the last year. In fact, we had 2,052 people move to Juneau and 1,715 move away for a net gain of 345 residents. And we know that 75% of the people that moved here came from outside the state and outside the region, and 25% came from within the state, and the majority of those came from the Anchorage-Mat-Su area. And the same goes for people moving away. Most moved down south, and those actually, I think that the majority, now that I think of it, is either from Anchorage. I think the majority is from Anchorage, but the majority from within Southeast came here from Ketchikan. The actual numbers are in the book, so net, right? Here's a trend in our population in Juneau, and each of these lines represents a different decade in terms of ages. And what you can see here is that those in the 50 to 59 age group, which is, in terms of this year, 2011, the top dot there, that's the group, has become the largest group in Juneau. So when you're walking around Juneau, this is the largest amount of people in town are in that age group. And in fact, they have been since 2007, when you could see that the trend line there crossed the, I believe it's the, must have been the 40 to 49. In other words, this is when those 40 to 49 moved up into the 50 to 59 group, is what I'm thinking happened here. The interesting thing here is that there's a trend in the 20 to 29 age group who have, as of last year, gone into the third largest, become the third largest group among us, which is good news, I think. In terms of the aging of our population, this is how we looked, how many people were, or the percent of people ages 55 and over in Juneau. In 1990, there were 10% of the population. In 2011, 23% of the population. And according to the state projections, by 2025, there'll be 32, one-third of the population in Juneau. Taking a look at some educational statistics, the Juneau School District has leveled out. I think we could say has leveled out in its student population. It did have that decline in earlier, but over the past few years, it's been bouncing around at a fairly level. It was up a little this year from last year, which I think was a little bit above what they anticipated for this year. So that was good news. The other thing that is of interest to us is that we're a very well-educated population, and this is for people ages 25 and over. In Juneau, 96% have a high school degree, which is a bit higher than both the state and the nation. And then more have bachelor's degrees and graduate degrees also than the state and the nation as a whole. Cost of living, well, not such good news here, but I don't think that comes as a surprise to us. The interesting thing, Juneau there is number 3. The interesting thing is that this is showing you 2009, 2010, 2011, and we have really shot up since 2009. In 2009, we were pretty even with Anchorage and Kodiak. Fairbanks was high, but we have shot up to be the highest among those communities. So why? Well, this is the components that go into the cost of living index, and what we can see is that our housing costs have pushed us up there, and also surprisingly, we have higher health care costs than the other communities. So, speaking of housing, here's the story of the average sales price of a single-family home. And this is now a single-family detached home only that we've looked at here. And what we've got is that the number, we've updated this to the third quarter of this year, 2012, to take a look at the most current numbers. And you can see how much those prices have increased just in the 3 quarters of this year. This is based on 186 sales for the year, and of course, depending on the type of houses sold, that this could still vary by the end of the year, could go down by the end of the year. But this is where we stand right now. There's been a big jump in housing prices again this year. Another issue, I think, with Juneau is the stock of housing at an affordable price. And in Juneau, the affordable housing is defined as housing that's $250,000 or below. And what you see, that box there is showing you how many of the houses in Juneau fall into that category. So this is the number of single-family homes in Juneau by assessed value in ranges. And so we've got only 20% of our housing stock in that, what we would define as affordable housing in Juneau. Rental prices in Juneau, we've just taken a look at 2000, 2011, 2012, and though they've gone up, it's fairly flat between last year and this year. No increases seen there. Housing permits in town are still down from the peaks that we've seen in the past, and not, in fact, again, trending down over the past 3 years. So that's a little concerning in that statistic. On the other hand, more good news in business sales in Juneau. They've been going up and have continued to go up. They're up 23% since 2009 when we had that dip. So that's looking good. The travel and visitor industry is one that, when I showed you that first pie chart, and we had different sectors of the economy there, we don't have a sector that's tracked by the state of Alaska as tourism. So we have to combine sectors that they do track to make our own definition of tourism. And when we combine those, we take the category called leisure and hospitality and add to it categories out of the transportation area. So air transportation, sightseeing, scenic flights, and things like that we wrap into a category that we call tourism. And if we calculate the employment for those categories, we have pretty flat, actually up 0.8% from last year, which is good news because that sector has been declining over the previous years. So I think that a stop in that decline and a little bit of a bump up is actually good news for the tourism industry. And so just to give you a few other interesting statistics about the tourism industry, every 5 years the state of Alaska commissions a survey of tourists that come to Alaska. And this past 2011 summer was their latest one. So these statistics that are on this chart and a couple of more come from that tourism study, and that's done by sampling tourists that come to Alaska and asking them about their experiences and other information. So it's then extrapolated from a sample amount. So what they found is that Juneau is the top tourist destination for tourists that come to Alaska. And in fact, 61% of all tourists to Alaska visit Juneau. And number 2 is Ketchikan, then comes Anchorage, then Skagway, and then Glacier Bay is number 6 on the list of the top destinations. So this reinforces how vital the cruise industry is to Juneau. Because, or not even Juneau, but all of Southeast. This is a statistics that shows that 68% of all visitors to Alaska come to the Southeast, but only 10% stay overnight. So this shows you that cruise industry is really vital to our economy here in tourism. So then the question was asked of visitors, what do they spend their money on while in Alaska? And this is not what they spend their money on necessarily in the community visited, but in general, when you come to Alaska, what do you spend your money on? And then it was sorted by people who come to Juneau, people who come to these communities. And the number one activity, shopping. So number 2 in Juneau is taking a train ride. So obviously this is a missed opportunity here in Juneau. We need to build a scenic train ride so that we capture that money here. A couple of other interesting things. Visitors to Petersburg and Wrangell actually do as much scenic wildlife viewing as they do shopping. It's where you get to where shopping is no longer so much more of an activity than anything else. And also in Southeast, the most overnight visitation is in Wrangell, and the most wealthy, highest income tourists also go to Wrangell. So a few interesting facts there. Cruise visitors visiting Juneau. After that dip in 2010, we have been going up, and the 2012 I've added in here is looking better than last year again, and next summer's estimate is going to be again higher, so we're back on track in recovery, which is good because we now know how important that is in our community. Air traffic, the only number that I wanted to point out here, air traffic is up for the past 3 years. Alaska Airlines is up, commuter air carriers are up, the smaller ones, and the non-scheduled on-demand air carriers, those are the scenic flights, the helicopter tours that leave from the airport, and that has seen an 8% jump since last year. And last year that took a pretty good dip. So it's good to see that's going back up too for the tourism industry. Healthcare is one of our bright spots in terms of its growth over the years. In last year, we went up 9%, a little over 9% in the number of jobs, actually in total payroll, not number of jobs. And it's gone up 25% since 2008. And here's one of the results of all that, the nice health care that we're receiving here. This is a survey that looked at health factors in communities in Southeast Alaska and rated Juneau as number 1 in, actually in Alaska, not in Southeast, but in all of Alaska. And health factors are those factors that influence the health of a community. So we have, we're the best at whatever factors influence the health of the community, and we're actually number 2 in our overall health in Alaska. Mining is our other bright spot in terms of its. We've had a change in an increase in employment of 21% last year, and since 2009, 57%. Jobs there are growing. And then the seafood industry is also looking very good for this past year. This is a survey that looks at all the fishery ports in the United States. And of all the ports, Bedford, Massachusetts is number 1 in the value of its fisheries. And on this same list, we've got Dutch Harbor is actually number 2. And Southeast Alaska, we've got Sitka down there. The last 4 there are Southeast Alaska, Sitka, Petersburg, Ketchikan, and Juneau. And you can see that they rank 9, 13, 14, and 39 in volume, and then in value of their seafood, and then the last column there is their rank in volume of seafood. But if you combine those communities into one entity and put it on this chart, what you see is that Southeast Alaska becomes number 2 in terms of the value of its fisheries. So as a combined region, we are number 2 in the United States. And we're also, if you combine us, number 6 in terms of volume, but I think value is a much better place to be number 2. What goes into our seafood values? This chart shows you that the majority of our the value of our seafood is in our salmon fisheries, but we've got sable fish and halibut also are numbers 2 and 3 in terms of contributing to the value of our seafood. And then in terms of salmon species, this is, mine's in black and white, which is why I'm not. I'm like, whoa, what color is that there? So number purple right there, which is pink salmon, thank you, is the contributing the most to value of our seafood. and Chinook, I guess, is number 2 in contributing to the value of our salmon. Is that right? Chum. Okay. Let's go back there. Oh, sorry. Oops. Sorry. There we go. So in terms of prices, our shrimp and sablefish have been showing great increases in price. And salmon has been just doing a nice sort of little bit upward trend there, but pretty steady there. And then finally, who, in terms of residents, who brings in the most fish in Southeast Alaska? Wrangell and Petersburg, as you can see here, are the pounds landed by the area of residency. That's where most of the fish are fished. You can see Juneau there is, I guess, pretty much number 4 in terms of our fishing volume. So how did we do? We have good news on most fronts. And maybe the housing, as we know, is an issue in the construction industry and the loss of jobs there. But in terms of our population, we're up, our employment is up, our payroll, our wages, our business sales. The mining industry is doing well, the fishing industry is doing well, healthcare industry is doing well. And so I guess I'll end on that positive news. Thank you.
Yeah. So these guys are willing to take some questions. Do we have some? I'm sure we have questions.
You didn't have anything in there on the land differentiation between the state and the feds and the local.
I don't, and I typically do. You want to know who owns what? Yeah.
Sorry.
In Southeast Alaska, I mean, it's an important issue because the federal ownership of our land is extremely important. So about 94.6% of the land in Southeast Alaska is owned by the federal government. About another 2.5% is owned by the state. Then we have native corporations that own about another 2%, which leaves only 1%, if I did the math real quick in my head there, if I'm accurate, is about 1% belongs to cities and private hands. So yeah, it's very, very different than you find anywhere else in our great nation where the preponderance of our land is owned by federal or state.
Brad? You can go ahead.
Okay.
Do you ever consider measuring stuff like how much electricity we use, how many gallons of diesel we burned, how much lettuce we eat? Because one of the questions I've been looking at your chart, and I'm wondering how much of it's inflation and how much of it is actual growth. I mean, population, we're not inflating, but maybe. But actual growth of business sales especially.
All right.
So by measuring stuff, what was the inflation rate for Southeast?
We don't have it. There's not an inflation rate for Southeast Alaska. We use the inflation rate. There's only one inflation rate calculated for our state, and that's the Anchorage CPI. So we don't have a rate here in our region. The inflation rate in the last year has been, I think it was 3.2% according to the Anchorage CPI, the latest numbers.
Well, the one chart had Juneau going substantially higher than the other 3 communities in Alaska. And if we were to imply an inflation rate out of that, it almost wipes out any growth.
Excellent. That's a great point. And we've had that question before, but how do we, because we're not Anchorage, we could use Anchorage as and I think we all default to that, but the costs are moving differently in our region. So that's why we choose not to put too much emphasis on the Anchorage rate and use just to show you the real numbers. But we could do, we've had people ask us to benchmark it against the Anchorage CPI, and we might do that more in the future if that's useful for folks. Thank you.
Brian, I have
Yes.
a question here. So on your cost of living index, the very top item says grocery items. And am I reading this properly, that it's actually cheaper to buy groceries here in Juneau than it is in Anchorage?
Yes, you're reading it correctly. On the basket of goods, and people go out and collect items. It's a national survey, so they tell us which item, which size, and even suggest the brand to be. And we go and we go to the various supermarkets in town, and that's exactly what you're reading there.
Did you test this? I mean, I've spent some time in Anchorage in the last year.
Well, yeah, we collect the data in Juneau, and we're confident that we're doing a good job. We don't know who's collecting the data everywhere else in the country, but we hopefully they're following the same guidelines. They're really pretty specific guidelines about this size tuna can, and we get a couple numbers. So we feel good about that data. Lauren?
Great presentation today. And this may have been in the book, but I haven't gone through it all yet. But has there been any studies on the income and educational trends based on demographics, specifically by age? Income and education by age? Because it seems like if we're a highly educated population here, what I'm trying to correlate is to the housing issue. And whether it truly is that big of an issue.
Right. Well, Abe, of course, is offering that we could look into it, but I don't think we have. We do know that there's a correlation with earnings and age, meaning how older you are, to a certain point, you're earning more money. But that we do have the data available to us. And I should make a commercial here for the Department of Labor and many other sources. We mostly compiled, bring the data together from sources. But that data, we could look at that, Lauren. Thank you very much.